The day I became the legal owner of my neighborhood's brand new clubhouse, people acted like I'd pulled off the greatest scam in county history. But the truth was a whole lot simpler than that. They built $500,000 worth of concrete, steel, and glass on land they never bothered to verify, then spent the next year reminding me, over and over again, why patience can be a far more dangerous weapon than anger. If you'd ask anyone in Maple Ridge Estates who the troublemaker was, every single finger would have pointed at me. Funny thing is, I never wanted to fight. My name's Daniel Harper. I'm 53 years old, and I live on 2 quiet acres outside a little town in eastern Nebraska, where the corn grows taller than pickup trucks by July and most folks still wave at each other on county roads. My grandfather bought this land after coming home from Korea, and my dad spent his weekends rebuilding the old farmhouse board by board. Every fence post, every oak tree, every crooked stretch of creek carried a memory, while the subdivision behind my property kept getting bigger, fancier, and louder. My place stayed exactly the way I liked it. Simple, peaceful, and mine. I wasn't part of their homeowners association. Never had been. I paid my county taxes, mowed my fields, fixed my own fences, and minded my own business. That arrangement worked just fine for nearly 15 years. Sure, every now and then somebody from the HOA would wander over asking if I'd consider selling my back acre because they wanted to improve community access. But I'd always smile and say the same thing. Appreciate the offer, but this land isn't for sale. Most people accepted that answer. The board president didn't. Her name was Lindy Brooks. And if confidence alone could move property lines, she'd have owned half the county. Linda loved talking about progress, investment, property values. Every sentence sounded like it belonged in a real estate brochure. Whenever we'd cross paths, she'd smile with that practiced politician grin and tell me, "Daniel, someday you'll realize you'd be better off joining the community instead of sitting outside it." I'd laugh and tell her, "I'm exactly where I want to be." She never liked that answer. Looking back now, I think that bothered her more than anything else. You can't pressure somebody who isn't chasing the same things you are. Then came one Friday afternoon in early April. I'd been helping my cousin repair irrigation lines across town and got home later than usual. Before I even shut off my truck, I heard diesel engines rumbling behind the shelter belt. The sound echoed through the trees, heavy and constant, the kind of noise that doesn't belong in open farmland. At first I figured the county was fixing drainage along the creek. They'd talked about doing that for years. But when I walked through the trees, my stomach tightened. There were excavators, concrete forms, survey stakes, a giant yellow crane, men in reflective vests shouting measurements back and forth. And planted right in the middle of it all was a glossy sign with an artist's rendering of a beautiful stone building beneath bold blue letters that read, "Future Maple Ridge Community Center." I stood there for a few seconds trying to make sense of what I was looking at, because something felt wrong before I could even explain why. Then I saw it, an old rusted survey marker, half buried in the dirt, sitting directly inside the construction zone. I knew that marker. My father showed it to me when I was 12 years old. "Never forget where this pin is," he'd said. People forget. Steel doesn't. Except now the steel pin was surrounded by fresh excavation. I walked straight toward the site superintendent and asked, "Who approved building here?" He barely looked up from his clipboard. "HOA project," he answered. "Everything's been cleared." I pointed toward the survey pin. "That's my property marker." He shrugged. Actually shrugged. "Our plans show common land." "Then your plans are wrong." He gave me that tired look contractors save for people they think are wasting their time. "Take it up with the board." That was it. No apology, no concern. Just keep the machines moving. I drove home angry enough to grind my teeth, but something my father used to say kept bouncing around in my head. Never argue with somebody who's holding a shovel. Let them finish digging first. 2 days later, an envelope arrived in my mailbox with the HOA logo stamped across the corner. Inside was a polished letter congratulating residents on the exciting expansion of neighborhood amenities. Buried near the bottom was one sentence that made me read it twice. Any minor boundary discrepancies discovered during construction will be resolved following project completion. Boundary discrepancies. They had somehow turned my family's land into a footnote. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the arrogance was almost impressive. That evening, I pulled an old metal lockbox out from beneath my bed. Inside were yellowed deeds, survey maps, tax records, and handwritten notes my grandfather had carefully preserved for decades. As the sun disappeared behind the fields, I spread every document across my kitchen table. I wasn't looking for revenge yet. I was looking for the truth, and I had a feeling the truth was about to become very expensive for somebody. The next Monday morning, I drove to the county recorder's office before most people had finished their first cup of coffee. And by lunchtime, I had certified copies of every deed connected to my property going back almost 60 years. That's when the first crack appeared in the HOA's perfect little story. Every legal description matched the papers my grandfather had saved. Every survey referenced the same creek, the same iron markers, the same eastern boundary. Nothing had changed except somebody else's confidence. I hired an independent surveyor named Carl Jensen, a gray-haired man who'd probably forgotten more about Nebraska property law than most attorneys ever learned. Carl spent 2 full days on my land with GPS equipment that looked like it belonged on a NASA mission. We walked every corner together, talking about old fence lines and weathered monuments hidden beneath weeds. Late Wednesday afternoon, he lowered his equipment, looked over his glasses, and said, "Well, they're not close." "How not close?" I asked. He folded his map and pointed directly through the center of the construction site. "Their foundation crosses your line by almost 16 feet. I stared at the drawing in silence. 16 feet didn't sound like much until you realized it ran nearly the entire length of the building. Half the clubhouse parking entrance, part of the main hall, landscaping, decorative stone walls, all of it crossed onto my property. Carl must have seen the look on my face because he added quietly, "I've testified in court for 30 years. If these measurements are challenged, I'll stand behind every inch." Most people would have marched straight into the HOA office waving that survey around. I almost did. Then something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was remembering the way the superintendent had shrugged without even checking. They'd already decided I didn't matter before anyone ever looked at the facts. So instead of confronting them, I made one phone call to a real estate attorney named Melissa Carter. She listened without interrupting while I explained everything, then asked one question. "Have you demanded they stop construction?" "Not officially." "Good." That wasn't the answer I expected. She leaned back in her chair, tapped the legal pad with her pen, and smiled the kind of smile that usually means somebody else is about to have a very bad day. "Daniel, sometimes the fastest way to win is by doing absolutely nothing." She explained that immediately forcing them to stop would almost certainly result in negotiations. They'd redesign the building, move a wall, buy a strip of land, write me a check, apologize through gritted teeth, and everyone would move on. But if they continued occupying my property while treating it as their own, maintaining it, improving it, documenting it, insuring it, all while ignoring repeated evidence of the true boundary, they would create a trail of evidence no jury could overlook. "Don't interfere," she said. "Observe." That single word changed everything. So I became the quietest witness they'd ever had. I bought a camera with an automatic date stamp. Every Saturday morning, I'd walk the edge of my field, carrying a cup of coffee, taking pictures from the exact same spots. Concrete trucks arrived. I photographed them. Landscapers planted expensive maple trees. Click. Electricians installed lighting. Click. Volunteers painted walls before the grand opening. Click. Holiday decorations appeared. Click. Summer concerts, community yard sales, children's birthday parties, Christmas wreaths, maintenance crews replacing mulch, snow plows clearing the parking lot. Every visit, every improvement, every dollar they poured into that building became another page in a story they didn't realize they were writing for me. Sometimes neighbors would wave and ask why I was always carrying a camera. I'd grin and say, "Just keeping track of the seasons." In a way, I wasn't lying. Meanwhile, Linda Brooks became something of a local celebrity. Newspaper articles praised the board for transforming Maple Ridge into one of the nicest communities in the county. She cut ribbons, gave interviews, talked about responsible leadership and smart planning. Once, during the clubhouse's first anniversary picnic, I happened to walk by while she was giving a speech. She spotted me standing near the fence and smiled into the microphone. Even our neighbors enjoy what we've built together. Several people turned and applauded politely. Linda thought she'd scored a public relations victory. I simply lifted my coffee cup toward her and kept walking. Melissa laughed when I told her about it. She has no idea she's introducing the future owner of that building. A year passed faster than I expected. Life settled into a strange routine. During the week, I repaired farm equipment for local ranchers, fished the creek when I had time, and visited my mother every Sunday afternoon. Then I'd spend 10 quiet minutes documenting whatever the HOA happened to be doing on my property that week. Sometimes I wondered if I was wasting my time. Maybe a judge would just tell them to compensate me. Maybe all this patience wouldn't matter. Whenever doubt crept in, Melissa reminded me that courts don't just decide cases. They evaluate behavior. "You showing restraint," she'd say. "They're showing entitlement." Eventually, the day came when she called and said, "We're ready." We filed an action to quiet title along with claims related to the encroachment, supported by survey records, historical deeds, photographs, maintenance logs, tax maps, witness statements, and enough documentation to fill 2 banker boxes. When the HOA received the paperwork, chaos erupted almost immediately. Linda requested an emergency meeting. Her attorney called Melissa twice before noon. By the end of the week, they wanted mediation. Funny how people suddenly become interested in compromise after spending a year pretending you don't exist. I attended the mediation anyway because Melissa insisted it would look better if I appeared reasonable. Linda walked into the conference room dressed like she was attending a corporate board meeting instead of a legal disaster. She smiled politely and slid a folder across the table. "Mr. Harper," she began, "we're prepared to offer generous compensation for the affected acreage." I didn't even open the folder. "You weren't interested in talking when I pointed out the survey marker." Her smile tightened. "Mistakes happen. Not for a year they don't." Her attorney jumped in. "Surely we can reach a practical solution," Melissa answered before I could. Practical would have been checking the property line before pouring concrete. Silence settled over the room. Linda finally sighed and looked directly at me. "What exactly do you want?" I thought about my grandfather, my father, that rusted survey pin buried beneath fresh concrete. Then I answered honestly, "I want the court to decide." The mediation ended less than 20 minutes later. The trial itself wasn't dramatic, the way television makes courtrooms look. Nobody pounded tables. Nobody shouted objection every 5 seconds. It was quieter than that, almost clinical. Carl explained the survey with calm precision. County officials verified the deeds. Melissa walked the judge through hundreds of photographs showing continuous occupation and improvement. The HOA's experts tried arguing mapping errors, historical ambiguity, even outdated markers, but every argument collapsed against decades of recorded documents. The judge asked Linda one question that seemed to suck all the air out of the courtroom. "When Mr. Harper first informed your organization there might be a boundary issue, why didn't you suspend construction until verification was completed?" Linda hesitated, just for a second. Then she answered, "We believed our plans were accurate." The judge nodded once, wrote something in his notes, and never asked another question. That's when I realized the case had already turned. We just hadn't heard the ending yet. 3 weeks later, the judge issued his ruling, and I'll never forget the silence that settled over the courtroom while everyone read the first page. Melissa reached over, squeezed my shoulder, and whispered, "Congratulations. You just won." It took a second for the words to register because I wasn't celebrating money. I was trying to understand how a year of patience had finally turned into justice. The court ruled that the encroachment had been proven beyond dispute, that the HOA had knowingly continued occupying and maintaining improvements on land that didn't belong to them after receiving notice of the boundary issue, and that their own actions had helped establish the evidence that ultimately worked against them. The quiet title action was granted. The legal description of my property was updated to reflect the court's decision. And with one signature, the clubhouse they had proudly unveiled to the neighborhood legally became part of my land. Linda looked like someone had unplugged the world around her. Her attorney leaned over to explain the ruling, but she just stared at me across the courtroom. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. After all that time, I honestly felt more tired than triumphant. Still, the story wasn't over. A few days later, I drove to the clubhouse carrying a single envelope. Families were inside preparing for another weekend community event, folding chairs, arranging snack tables, laughing like they always had. I taped the notice beside the front entrance, stepped back, and waited. It didn't take long before Linda came storming outside with 2 board members trailing behind her. She ripped the paper off the glass and shouted, "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," I answered. "This building is private property now." Her face turned bright red. "You can't throw an entire neighborhood out." I looked at her calmly and said, "I'm not throwing anyone out. The owner is exercising his rights, the same rights your board ignored when this started." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Some neighbors had gathered in the parking lot, whispering to each other. A few looked confused. Others looked embarrassed. One older gentleman I'd spoken with a handful of times over the years slowly walked over and quietly said, "Daniel, if what they told us back then wasn't true, I'm sorry." That apology meant more than any court order ever could. Over the following months, the HOA was forced to relocate every meeting, remove portions of the pool deck that crossed the legal boundary, and pay nearly $190,000 in combined legal expenses and related costs. Linda resigned before the end of the year. Several other board members quietly followed. The newspaper that once praised the clubhouse ran a very different headline about governance, accountability, and expensive assumptions. As for me, I didn't sell the building. I didn't tear it down either. Instead, I converted it into the workshop I'd always dreamed about. The banquet hall became a woodworking shop. One meeting room turned into storage for my tractors and restoration projects. Every now and then I'd open the dig garage-style doors, let the breeze roll through, and think about my grandfather. He always believed land deserved respect because once you lost it, you rarely got it back. Out front, where the polished HOA sign used to stand, I installed a simple cedar post with a modest black plaque that reads, "Private property." Nothing flashy, nothing sarcastic. It doesn't need to be. The building tells the whole story better than any sign ever could. Sometimes people driving through the area slow down just to look, and every so often somebody asks whether I think I went too far. Maybe that's the real question, isn't it? Should I have accepted the check and moved on? Or was standing my ground the only reason justice was ever possible? I'd honestly like to hear what you think, because situations like this aren't always black and white. If you were in my shoes, would you have stopped the construction on day one? Or would you have let the law take its course the way I did? Drop your thoughts down in the comments, because I read every one of them. And if this story made you think, surprised you, or reminded you that patience can sometimes be stronger than anger, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves real stories where the ending is anything but predictable.